Help support fearlessly independent, unabashedly pro-democracy news by subscribing to Democracy Docket today. The link is above or in the show notes below. Big news out of the state of North Carolina, where Allison Riggs, the incumbent Democratic justice on the state Supreme Court, has won yet another counting of the ballots. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. Third time was the charm, and it affirmed that Allison Riggs is the winner of the North Carolina State Supreme Court race. After initial count, one machine recount, and a partial hand recount time and time again, the North Carolina State Board of Elections says that Allison Riggs has more votes than her Republican opponent, Judge Jefferson Griffin.
Yeah, and that means there will not be a fourth counting of the ballots. I mean, the one thing about North Carolina, you got to say for them, they've got no shortage of opportunities to count, recount, and recount ballots in the case of a close election. And this was a close election, but in order to require the state to do an entire hand recount, what they call a hand to eye recount in North Carolina, there has to be enough of a change or a discrepancy in the partial recount to justify that. And since Allison Riggs won on what we'll call the first count, right, the election count, won the machine recount, and then this partial recount didn't change things, that's going to be the end of the road for Judge Griffin, who is the Republican opponent. And I just want to be clear at the outset so that people don't get any confusion. I am not calling him the Republican or Justice Riggs the Democrat because I am assigning this to them. The Republican legislature in the state of North Carolina had a few years ago, passed a law, forced state Supreme Court judicial candidates, including their state Supreme Court, to run in partisan elections. They used to be nonpartisan elections. The Republican legislature saw an advantage of making them partisan. So now they run with party labels. And the Republican candidate, who was a lower court judge, has now lost yet again. But Paige, that is not the end of the story, because as you and I have covered in a previous video, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes below, and as Democracy Docket has been covering in its on its website constantly, in its newsletters constantly, Judge Griffin, notwithstanding the fact that he's a judge, along with the Republican Party, have been looking to disenfranchise, wait for it everyone, 60,000 voters. 60,000. I mean, this is like on the order of magnitude of we saw what Donald Trump did in 2020, but yet this seems to have escaped the national attention in the way in which those outrageous claims did then.
Once it became clear that Justice Riggs was winning by about 700 votes, Republicans launched this challenge. They're calling into question the validity of over 60,000 ballots in the state, like you said. They're claiming that these people have incomplete voter registrations, that maybe they're not eligible to vote. Marc, and as you discussed in your interview with Justice Riggs earlier this week, a lot of those ballot challenges are actually challenging the votes of military members and their families, and they're taking a direct aim at the people who claim North Carolina as their home, but currently living abroad due to military service or other service to the country.
Yeah, let's show a brief clip of that now.
I want to make sure that everyone understands what's happening, that the ability of military voters and their families is under attack in this post-election dispute, where after two counts, a count and a recount, and most of the way through a second recount, I've won this election, that we're bringing innocent people who are serving their country into this debate and dispute in a way that would undermine a fundamental right of theirs. And it should be troubling to everyone.
So Paige, one of the things, and I talked to Justice Riggs about this, as you saw, that really sort of astounds me is how the Republican Party over really the last 12 months, really, if you date it back, it really started in 2024, sort of at the beginning of the year as they were plotting out their litigation strategy, how they have time and time again now really targeted military and overseas voters. I mean, it was once sacrosanct that neither party would do anything to disenfranchise military voters who are voting overseas. But and then we started to see like these one-off cases around the country. And like at first we were like, oh, that's just must be some weirdo right-winger who's bringing these challenges. But then the Republican Party itself started getting engaged in this. And this was a concerted effort in the pre-election phase. It's something that the RNC and the various Republican parties and their allies were engaged in pre-election. And now, it is now, the Overton window is shifted. And now it's kind of like, oh yeah, of course the Republican Party of North Carolina and this candidate want to disenfranchise people who are protected by this federal law that protects military and overseas voters, because that's what they do. And it's just remarkable how this has shifted with so little attention. So the other thing that has not gotten the attention is, what the status is on these challenges. I mean, people keep saying 60,000 have been challenged, but like, what's going on?
Right, Marc. The good news is none of these challenges have succeeded yet. Now, Griffin has asked a couple courts in North Carolina to expedite the processing of these challenges. They rejected those requests. The North Carolina State Board of Election met earlier today to review those challenges, and they have rejected them. Now, Marc, the big question is what happens if these ballot challenges end up before the state Supreme Court about an election for a seat on the court involving a current judge on the court?
Yeah, just to review the bidding here, the North Carolina State Supreme Court used to be one of the most balanced courts in the country. It had a slight Democratic lean for a while, but it really was kind of a down the center court. Then what happened is, as I mentioned earlier, Republicans in the legislature saw a way to sort of capture the court on a partisan basis by making those elections partisan rather than nonpartisan. And it worked. And so the North Carolina Supreme Court is sort of unrecognizable from what it was even just a few years ago. It is right now a solid 5-2 majority Republican. And it performs, if that's a word that you can use for courts. It's usually a word we use for politicians, but it performs as a partisan Republican court. It is not like the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is nominally, I think, Democratic, but which you saw handed Democrats and progressives some high-profile losses in voting cases. It's not like some other courts that are nominally Republican that go the other way. It has proved itself over the last year or so to be a pretty reliably Republican court in these election type cases. There was a redistricting case where they took pretty extraordinary actions to restore partisan gerrymandering. Not something you usually hear uttered. They also took pretty they ruled pretty aggressively in a voter ID case. So they're not going to be friendly, I don't think, to Justice Riggs's legal position. And I think they'll be receptive to Judge Griffin's legal position because, that's kind of their disposition. But the question of whether this is ultimately too far for even them to swallow is something worth following. It is also worth following whether this is something that the federal courts, rather than the state courts, will have to decide. Because, first of all, throwing out 60,000 votes implicates federal constitutional rights. But also, as we pointed out, the military and overseas ballots are protected by federal law, by a federal statute that Congress passed. There is already a case in federal court that was brought by the Democratic Party, I believe, in North Carolina. And then obviously, as you point out, the state case. So there's a lot that's going to have to be sorted out. And I just want to point out that's a good reason to make sure that you are subscribed to Democracy Docket to get its free daily and weekly newsletters. I'll put a link above and in the show notes below. Or if you want even more premium content, which does cover these things in North Carolina, and you want to support fiercely independent media, you can become a paying member of Democracy Docket, and that link is also in the show notes below.
Marc, a huge part of these ballot challenges comes from local reporting from the Raleigh News and Observer, which notes that within Griffin's ballot challenges, Black voters were twice as likely to have their vote challenged compared to others.
Yeah. Now, do you think that's by mistake? Do you think Paige, like the Griffin folks, woke up one day and they're like, okay, everyone, we're going to look these over totally on the merits. Okay, I don't want anyone targeting Democrats. I don't want anyone targeting young voters. I don't want anyone targeting Black voters. I just want to do what's right. Do you think that that's what happened? Or do you think that what we saw here was something else? Because it is not just that there is a a racial disparity where, about 20% of all the protests were black voters, and white voters accounted for 33%, despite a 3-to-1 ratio of white voters to black voters. It's not just that, but it is also an age disparity. Where young voters, 18 to 25, accounted for 23% of all the challenges. And that was the largest group targeted, notwithstanding the fact they only make up 12% of the electorate. So this is not a neutral challenge in the effect it would have on the outcome. This would be a outcome determinative set of challenges. And I have to say, I have done more or as much post-election litigation as any lawyer in the country. I have litigated literally hundreds of cases at this point that either had impact in the post-election or were brought in the post-election, certainly dozens just in the post-election itself. And I have never seen a claim to throw out this many ballots on a sweeping basis. First of all, I've never seen a claim to throw out this many ballots, but it does so not by saying, look, here is what, Paige Moskowitz did wrong, but rather sort of by these categories. I've never seen a claim like this succeed. First of all, prior to 2020, you never saw these kinds of claims. I mean, these would have been laughable claims. The idea that you're going to throw out 60,000 votes after the election would have been just viewed as preposterous. Donald Trump popularized it in 2020, but remember, he lost all those efforts, right? Donald Trump was excoriated in the media and by courts for trying to do mass disenfranchisement by throwing out tens of thousands of votes at a time. And then in 2022, Paige, as Democracy Docket covered, we saw, kind of some of these similar tactics in Arizona, where again, like the mainstream media treated, what Kerry Lake and the other band of protester, election protesters or contesters, viewed it as kind of like, back of the hand. But now here we are, we have this in North Carolina, it's being treated seriously. It's not being covered enough, I don't think, by the legacy media. And it's claims being brought by a Republican Party that now thinks it's playing offense on these kinds of claims.
I also think it's very interesting because this is the race that the North Carolina Republican Party is challenging. They're challenging the Supreme Court race. Like you said, they already have a majority on the court. They're not questioning the governor's race, the AG's race, the lieutenant governor's race. They're not challenging other statewide offices, just this state Supreme Court race where control of the court is not at stake. So the question is, why? Why won't Griffin just concede? He could run again in 2 years when the other Democratic justice, Anita Earls, is up for re-election.
Yeah, I think there are two reasons why he won't concede. First of all, because in the modern Republican Party, concession is viewed as a weakness. They have flipped on its head what used to be considered civility and norms and peaceful transfer of power. They have flipped all of that on their head, right? This is a party that now celebrates January 6th defendants and excoriates the January 6th, the police who were defending the Capitol on that day. This is a party that has embraced Donald Trump as its, not just its standard bearer, but sort of its movement and leader and savior. So in some sense, this judge who I don't know is just meeting the moment of the Republican Party in which there is no benefit to be gained within his political party in conceding a race. It is better for him to go down a sore loser and then claim fraud and irregularities than to acknowledge that he lost a close election. So that's reason number one. Number two, I do think when it comes to the party, right, you asked two questions. Like one is, what is he up to? And then the other is, what is the party up to? I think that the Republican Party right now, as I said, believes itself ascendant on these issues, right? It feels like it ran a voter suppression, what it calls an election integrity program. It filed an unprecedented number of lawsuits in 2024. Democracy Docket is a leader in covering that and providing analysis about that. So, you can see that there. And I think they think it worked. I think they figure like maybe what we did in 2020 didn't work, but sure as hell seemed to work in 2024. And we're now, feeling pretty good about this. So, Paige, I think that they are full steam ahead on these tactics. Look at who Look at who Donald Trump just appointed to put ahead of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice.
Right. He's picked Harmeet Dillon to lead the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. She is a California lawyer. She was a vice chair of the California Republican Party. Her law firm has been involved in dozens of lawsuits involving getting Trump on the ballot, contesting voting rights laws, just trying to make it generally harder for people to vote. We have a breakdown of Harmeet Dillon and her background. If you want to learn more, up on Democracy Docket right now. Click the link above to check that out.
Yeah. And so I think we have not seen the last of this. I think that, for everyone who cares about democracy, this is not the time to disengage. I understand the impulse. I understand people are tired. I understand that people are pissed off at a lot of people, including the legacy media, and that's fine. Look, I've been as critical of the legacy media as anyone, but being pissed at the legacy media and turning off the TV or canceling your subscription to news outlets that you don't agree with is different than disengaging. And so, it may be that we all need to take, a moment here, but now that moment is over. And now we need to be focused on these things because the Republican Party is trying to disenfranchise voters in North Carolina. There was just a hearing the other day that Democracy Docket reported on where the RNC is still going after the election rules in Arizona. Right? These things aren't stopping on the other side, and we can't let them stop on our side either. And one of the critical things that everyone can do who is watching this is to pay attention and to not give up and not let the cynics win and not believe that your voice is not helpful, not believe that there is nothing we can do and that Donald Trump will get his way. The fact is the resistance in 2016, after 2016, did not fail. Those of you who celebrate the Affordable Care Act. The reason we have the Affordable Care Act is because of the resistance. That's what kept Donald Trump from being able to repeal it. The reason why Democrats did so well in the 2018 midterm elections was because of the resistance, the groundwork that was laid. Now, look, I've written about the need to do something bigger than that. We need an opposition, not just a resistance. We need something that is for the longer term, that is more durable, because the fact is Donald Trump and Trumpism is not going away. And the kinds of things we've been talking about today in North Carolina are not going away. They're going to spread. So we need it to be bigger, more durable, and more aggressive. You can read what I've written about that on Democracy Docket. There'll also be a link to the video that Paige and I did on that. And we will be, I promise you, we will be at the forefront of the coverage of what's going on in North Carolina, but what's going on around the country in these fights and the continued fight for democracy. So thank you again, everyone. Please make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters, and we'll see you next time.